Well, greetings, friends. I've despaired of really being able to find time or legitimate opportunity to talk to you about what I'll call the story of God in class. So I'm going to do this as an assignment because I do want to talk about the making of this book, largely as a way to help situate what you're reading for this class, that is specifically my book, The Story of God, into, we'll say, the larger conversation that is Christian theology. So, also being aware of the fact that it's difficult for me to tell any stories, without including all details. In other words, I'm not good at omitting details. Thought maybe it'd be better to kind of tackle it this way. So I want to say that I think the real seeds of this book began when I was in seminary. I think my last year in seminary, when I read a book that I still own and that I quote in The Story of God, maybe only one time, I'm not sure. What Can God Do? Question mark, by a man named Frederick Sontag. There he is right there. Frederick Sontag has passed away. This book was published, 1979. That was the year I met my wife. And 2 years later, I graduated from seminary. So I guess I bought this book and read it very shortly after it was published. I was probably aware already of the name of Frederick Sontag. I'm not deeply immersed in his work, but I can tell you that, as it says on the back here, no, it doesn't say it there. Maybe here. Did his PhD at Yale. Special training in metaphysics, philosophy of religion, existentialism, philosophical theology, and philosophical psychology. Sontag taught for decades at Pomona College, up just north of us, and east of LA. Part of the Claremont College is up there, very fine school. He taught there for decades. He taught there into his 80s. Indeed, he didn't retire till he was somewhere in his 80s, as I recall. So let's say 84, 85 years old. My goodness. So he retires, and then several months later, he died. Short retirement, my friends. I'm not planning on the same thing. I'm not going to go that long. But this book, What Can God Do? It really piqued my interest back in seminary when I bought it and read it. They're short chapters, and it's got two main parts. The first part is called God Is, and the second main part is called God Is Not. And so the first half is like God is, chapter 1, able to suffer, able to love, able to be free, etc. Then in the second part, God is not. And just so you can know some of the chapters, God is not able to become nothing. God is not able to reject anything. I'm going to have to reread this book and find out. God is not able to control those who represent him. God is not able to exclude desire, not able to avoid evil. The last chapter, God is not able to predict the future. I think that might be the chapter I quote from in The Story of God. And then the last chapter is called God is not able to be very religious. And that gives you a little clue, perhaps, that while not a book written with tongue in cheek by any means, that meaning sort of sarcastically, he definitely, Sontag, employed a light touch in this book. There's a lot of humor, some of it subtle, some of it, theological humor. Only some of us can appreciate that. No, well, we all can. But I remember thinking, this is kind of an interesting read. The chapters are short. He's speculative at times. He says some things that one might go, about. But it sort of captured my imagination, this little book, What Can God Do? I actually have several other books by Frederick Sontag on my shelf. The only other one I know that I've read, he became quite an expert on the Unification Church, which you may or may not have heard of. It's kind of dwindled now, but in the 70s it was a very big thing. The founder was a Korean preacher by the name of Sun Myung Moon. So this book is called Sun Myung Moon and the Unification Church. I did read that one, I think, while I was a pastor. I don't know why. Fresh out of seminary. This I read in seminary. Well, so that's sort of at the background. Then I become a pastor. You can see I omit no details. I am a pastor up in La Puente, California, just north of here. And sometime early in my pastorate, I remember saying to myself something like this: here you are, the pastor of a Nazarene congregation, and you haven't even read through the whole Bible. Now, I'd read through the whole New Testament and on multiple occasions, but it was true then and it may still be true now. I had not read all the way through the Old Testament. So I set myself a task of beginning to plow through the Old Testament. The fact that I don't think I've completed it means as far as I know, I never got all the way through. I may by now have maybe I've read it all, not sure. But in any case, as I began reading, I'd certainly read all of the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible. But the further I got in, the more I'd find myself surprised by things I read. Like, wow, I didn't know that this is said about God in the Old Testament, that sort of thing. And at some point I decided to begin writing little meditations, not terribly unlike, and certainly kind of inspired by Sontag's book, where I was dealing with passages in the Old Testament that had caught me by surprise, and that I thought could be fun, and more than fun, instructive and even challenging for readers to encounter some of the imagery of God that we encounter in the Old Testament from time to time. I even had a working title. I remember I was thinking Images of God in the Old Testament was what I thought might work as a title. Anything of worth, and probably some things that aren't of worth, in those manuscripts made it into the book, The Story of God. But at that point, I was just writing these little 3 to 4 page kind of playful meditations. I know for sure I wrote the one on Abraham that's in The Story of God. That's pretty much word for word. That little chapter is what I'd written in this little meditation. So I had these meditations I was working on, where the idea would be to take a story, a particular story of in the Old Testament, and sort of explore how God is rendered or described or narrated in that story. Well, somewhere along that process, I got an invitation from a seminary friend of mine who ended up being my colleague here at Point Loma when I moved here. He did all of his teaching career at Point Loma, but before he started teaching, he was a youth pastor down the freeway from me, up there. He was a little farther east of LA. He was in a church in, somewhere out near Pomona, actually. So if you're familiar with that area, I can't remember the name of the church. The name of the guy is Sam Powell. Now, some of you may know Dr. Powell or remember him. He's retired only a year ago, but I know that often, anyway, he's just retired. And Sam, and if you know him at all, the thought of him being a youth pastor is funny enough. But he was, and he invited me to be his retreat speaker. They were going to have a snow retreat for the youth group up at Big Bear. And so I said, and he invited me to be the speaker. I said, yeah, that'd be great. So I remember still very well as we're driving, this would be on Highway 10, I think. Well, it doesn't matter where we were, but we were going to Big Bear. And Sam Powell is driving. At the time, he's doing his doctoral studies. We'd both been in seminary in Kansas City, Nazarene Theological Seminary. He had gone directly, having grown up out here, he went directly back to Southern California for his doctoral work. I, out of seminary, went straight to LA to be a pastor, and did that for several years before pursuing doctoral work. So he's the guy that's doing doctoral studies in theology. So I asked him, hey, Sam, so what's what are the big things happening in the theological world? You're a big PhD student now. What are people talking about? What's the rage? And whether you know him or not, I can guarantee you he has a very, I would say, kind of cynical tone to him. I mean, that's part of his humor and part of his attraction. And so I remember him speaking rather gruffly and dismissively about this stuff they're calling narrative theology. Narrative theology? What's that? He said, well, it's sort of the idea that Scripture tells the story of God through these stories that we encounter, and that theology is best understood sort of in narrative form as the telling of stories. And I mean, I can't remember exactly what he said, but I can tell you that was the first time I ever heard of narrative theology. And that was on my way up to Big Bear with Sam Powell. I'll pause here because I know you're just hanging on the edge of your seats to hear chapter 2.